First off, I have that USSR thing we were doing earlier stuck in my head. That's gonna that's gonna put a real
really,
damper on
you
our
should
day.
really open this one with a little thing of us singing that.
The fucking I say, comrade,
Comrade.
you must
Steel
sleep on the ground. I say, comrade,
Comrade.
steel production
Steel
is
production
down.
is down. I
I
said,
say,
comrade,
comrade.
you must wait.
No,
Isn't it
there's
not
not,
enough
not enough food to go
food
around.
to go around?
It really sucks to live right here.
You
I don't
gotta
know.
starve in the USSR.
SSR.
You're
It
gonna
really
starve
sucks
in
in
the
the USSR.
So I love how the internet delay sucks just enough. We cannot do this.
I don't think it's the internet delay. I think we're just that bad at coordinating a song. Hello, and welcome to the Sardonic Podcast. I'm your host with extra typos in the script today for some reason, Elijah Stubbs O'Shea. Joining me on this episode is a man whose single-player experience is only matched by his single-hand gameplay skills. It's Jake Midas Barger. Typos are there. And he's recently mastered the art of cinematography using nothing but his eyes. It's Drew Chezwik Smith. So today we're talking about cinematic games. And that's a very blanket term. It has a lot of connotations, a lot of stigma, a lot of things that you think about, and it's pretty ill-defined as just using that term, cinematic games. And the first point I'm going to bring up is I'm going to define a cinematic game for the premises of this conversation. So today, when I use the word cinematic game, I am referring to a game that can utilize visual audio components to either capture a scene, to convey a message, or to tell story without the use of expositionary dumps. So while a game like Knights of the Old Republic 2 has a great story, a wonderful storytelling, it is mostly done through exposition dumping. There's not a whole lot of additional components to it. So with that out of the way, I want to talk about the reason why I brought up cinematic gaming. And that is God of War. The new God of War game. I've recently played it, got done playing it. It is fantastic. It should be played by everybody who owns a PlayStation. Get the game, put it in your console, and then play it until you're sick.
Not sponsored.
And then play it after you're sick, because that way you're not working.
Exactly. So the reason this came up is because there's a lot of moments in God of War in which a lot of emotion is being conveyed through subtleties in, say, Kratos' facial expression or the way the camera is operating. Kratos doesn't speak a lot. I think, in fact, in the whole game, you can sum up all of his lines in probably 20 to 35 minutes of just straight audio clips. He's not
and
very
19
vocal.
of those 20 minutes is boy.
Boy, come here. Yes, and I actually want to talk about that one too real fast, because I think that's a great aspect of this, is that falls into exposition dumping, but I guess it's good enough to talk about, because he calls him boy a lot, but it helps to separate the scenes where he's concerned, because when he's really worried about Atreus, he uses Atreus' name. He doesn't just say boy. When he goes missing, you hear him shout Atreus as he's running after him, and that separates the moments out a little bit, and I think that's a well-done component. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking about visuals and audio. So one of the big things with God of War is, like I said, they really do put a premium on some of Kratos' facial expressions. He's stoic a lot. His facial expressions don't change very often. But you do see the subtleties in the game through his minor changes in expression. There's a scene in God of War. It's right before you collect the Blades of Chaos. Spoiler warning. But you get in this boat and you kind of drift down the river back to Kratos' house. And this shot is one continuous shot. There's no cuts. And the camera is just kind of circling the boat. And you get to see Kratos' expressions change. And then they do this really cool effect where it pans through his body and you see the ghost of Athena. And you see these... it's a somber scene. The music is building, but slowly. It's kind of ramping. There's a lot of tension for just a quiet boat ride down the river. You can tell that something is about to happen, something serious. and it's captured so beautifully in this scene. Is there any like really big cinematic scenes in gaming that you guys really like look back on and think that this is really well constructed?
I don't play as many cinematic games anymore just because they're kind of a little bit rarer, if you know what I mean. With all the games like League and whatnot taking up a lot of people's time, people don't seem to make it as much. But I think from my childhood, I remember the Jack and Daxter series, and the cutscenes were short and usually very direct, but they always conveyed their point very quickly, whether it was a joke about Daxter missing his underwear or Jack's connection with his friends. So I think that I'm just going to go ahead and say literally every cutscene in Jack and Daxter.
But how much
I'm
of that connection was built on dialogue?
Well,
did they ever use camera or facial expressions or things to really convey the thought?
They had to use nothing but camera and facial expressions in the first game because Jack has 0 speaking lines. It's all Daxter and the other characters speaking. But you can clearly see from the way he looks at Kira or the exasperated expressions on his face when Daxter speaks the way he feels about things. It's used very well.
And Drew, what about you? Do you have any of these shots?
I'm actually going to have to go with a newer game, and I would barely put this game onto this list, but Detroit Become Human. Throughout the game, and this, I will be spoiling it a little bit for those of you who haven't played it. You play as multiple characters, each one who has a different directive that they want to go, and they're all cyborgs or androids. Sorry. And during one of the protest scenes, you can just decide to be nonviolent. And if you do, the way how the game shows it and the somber attitude of the whole thing, you feel like, even without listening to the words going on, because I'm sure there were words, you feel the emotion through the carnage the game is showing, the panning of the camera. It's supposed to look like it's a news feed that your average citizen would be watching, and you really do feel for these characters, many of whom you don't know because it's mindless android number 2 or 4 or whatever. But you do start to feel for their cause just because of how everything is done.
Here's a really good one in my opinion. This is a scene that does use exposition dumping in the scene itself, but I think even without that, there's some real powerful moments in it. It is the end of Metal Gear Solid 3. Metal Gear Solid 3 as a whole is a deconstruction of all of the like great masculinity stereotypes that exist. And I think this scene really kind of puts the cherry on top. Yeah, it is a very somber scene. There's only narration happening, and there is some background music. But the scene shows Snake, now Big Boss, walking through a cemetery to an unmarked grave and putting the boss's pistol, machine gun, whatever. It's technically an assault rifle that she cut the barrel and stock off of, but it looks like a pistol, on her grave along with a bouquet of flowers. And even though there's narration happening, and the narration itself is sad, and hearing it is sad, and the context is all very sad, seeing this scene directly after a scene where, you know, Big Boss is being heralded as the greatest hero for what he's just done, going to the unmarked grave of the woman he just killed, who was like his mother, and everything that's come up to this point, the only thing he doesn't say a thing. He has no lines, but he salutes the grave, and you have this ability to hit the R1 button on the PlayStation 2, and it goes into a first-person perspective, and the screen becomes all blurry, because you can see that he's tearing up. And when you're not in the first-person perspective, you can almost barely see them. But when you see it from this aspect, when you see the tear in his eyes, you kind of... It really hits you how much this scene is trying to tell you about what it is. You know, he's this macho man, you know, he's fucking kicked the shit out of people with his fists. He survived by eating snakes in the wild. He had all the cool things about James Bond and like Arnold Schwarzenegger wrapped up into one character. And here he is, crying at a person's grave. And it's a very profound moment where everything just kind of comes together. With almost no dialogue except for the narration. It is an exceedingly powerful moment in the game. That one it really just stood out to me when I was thinking about this, when I was planning this episode. And Metal Gear Solid is full of great moments of that. But there's another form of storytelling that I think you can find through visual aspects. And I think probably the big one, like the game that I think really excels at telling a story with nothing but visual elements, not even a cutscene, is probably Dark Souls. You both play Dark Souls.
Oh yeah, I love Dark Souls.
Yeah, we've all been down that street. But there's a lot of like areas, like level designs in Dark Souls that can tell you a whole lot more story than anything else. Like, I think one of the ones I remember is how like the ramparts are set up in the first game, where they're all kind of like angled towards the broken aqueduct, which is connected to the lower city, which they've barred off. Or how, the placement of the bosses, where they're at, gives you an indication of what it is that they're trying to protect. Or even just the dynamic change between enemy types between the upper and lower Undead Burg. There's all these very subtle things that are being played with visually to tell a story. I think we all have a different story when we play Dark Souls. What's the Grand Archives? Jake,
In
why
Dark
do
Souls
you...
3?
Yeah, in Dark Souls 3. Do you remember the 3 giant angels on top?
I do.
I want to ask you guys, why do you think those 3 angels are there?
Mostly to player for 300 points.
All right, we'll start with Jake. Why do you think that, from a story perspective, those 3 angels are sitting on top of the Grand Archives?
Well, I'm sure pretty much everyone who's played Dark Souls 3 now has noticed all of the pictures of winged knights in the entire upper part of the castle once they've gotten there in Dark Souls 3. So it shouldn't come as a surprise to you that there are actual flying knights on top of there. But I think the story I like best is that they were up there to protect Gertrude, who is strongly implied to have been in that cage underneath where they're guarding.
And Drew, what about you?
That was my understanding as well. I mean, the way how all 3 of them are even just arranged around that tower before the character actually goes and aggroes them, you can tell that they're standing watch. They are all looking in different directions. They're positioned around it. So you can tell that they are protecting or guarding something, or just keeping a lookout. But if you were just keeping a lookout, then they would be more spread out. They were obviously guarding something. And with the location, like Jake said, of the cage, the whole thing just kind of seems to click in place as far as that goes.
I always thought differently. See, when I saw those 3 angels, I thought, well, they don't seem to get along with the Lothric Knights. Like, you never see these 2 things together. They're always, like, whenever you see a winged a knight, there's always, like, bodies of Lothric Knights around it. Or foot soldiers. But you never see those 2 enemies together. Is it because the game thinks that, putting those 2 enemy types together would just be too hard and unfair to the player? I somehow doubt that because it's Dark Souls. But I thought, because when I saw them in the very bottom in the Undead Burg, or not the Undead Burg, the High Wall of Lothric, that he had clearly killed a bunch of Lothric Knights, that perhaps they were at war with the Lothric Knights. And then when you see them up there, they're right next to a bridge where all the ramparts, all the defenses clearly are there to keep something away. I have a feeling it's not librarians from the archives. It might be that those 3 angels are pretty pissed at the twin princes. Notice that the person that they're quote-unquote trying to guard isn't exactly there anymore. So I wonder if they plan to attack the twin princes and they have all these guards and things trying to protect them. That's why they're up there. They're waiting for their moment. Or it could be wrong. The reality is that they don't really ever tell you why they're up there. But they give you all the tools to make your own story. And I think that's a great way to use storytelling elements in a game. if you're going to make an interactive experience, why not let the people playing have an interactive part in the telling of your tales? And I like that way of thinking. Now, no one else does that. That's that's basically Dark Souls does that, and then Bloodborne, and then the rest of us just don't do that. But it brings me up to the next kind of point I want to talk about, which is that there is a monstrosity that I call multiplayer that is just consuming the gaming industry. Now, we all play games together. Let me rephrase that. Me and Jake play games, and then Drew drags the matchmaking down so that we can win a few of them.
Or I just don't play with you guys anymore.
Hey. Hey, you're always invited to get yelled at because you get immediately killed in most of the games we play. But
That's true.
But it is true that companies and game developers are maximizing profit margins by making multiplayer games. Multiplayer games are the magical money-making machine that they are, and I kind of want to talk about this. Because I think that multiplayer games have a time and a place, and with the right people can be wonderful experiences. But I also don't want every goddamn game to be made to be a multiplayer game. They're making everything multiplayer nowadays. It's kind of upsetting.
It's hard to be antisocial when they keep forcing it on us.
How can I not connect with people when all of my video games connect me with people, damn it? But it's true that it kind of consumes things. Yeah, I was talking about how multiplayers consume the industry because of profit margins, and that's kind of shitty. It's kind of shitty because storytelling and video games is a very unique combination of things. There are a lot of stories that you cannot tell in a movie that you can tell in a video game because you can interact with the story. It becomes more of an experience and less of just a consumer product. And visual storytelling is one of my favorite ways that games do this, that they can program these kind of philosophies. And multiplayer doesn't do that. It just doesn't do it for me. So I'll start with Jake here. What is your opinion on the multiplayer market's kind of big boom?
The big boom is the nuke going off, destroying all of my childhood dreams. I'll be real with you. If I were to take one look at my Steam library right now, it'd be 15% multiplayer games I play all the damn time, and everything else is single player games I barely put any time into because I don't have time between if I'm playing with my friends which I like to do. I like my friends, most of them. But I have all these single player games that just get kind of pushed to the wayside. And I think if someone were to look at those stats, they'd be like, oh, clearly people want multiplayer. So we're going to bring them multiplayer so we can do the money.
Andrew, what about you? How do you feel or interact with this multiplayer market?
I don't mind the multiplayer side of the video game industry purely for the fact of that's what people want to play. Then they have all the right to do so. However, and I'm going to say something I don't know if I've ever said before, I'm actually really happy with EA for this.
Okay, whoa. I have to stop you there. Now, I know we talk about controversial subjects here on the Sardonic Podcast, but I can't be having people coming on my show and talking about liking EA, man. I have to keep some principles here, man. I can't just do you want me to invite people and say that they also like Nazis? This is not okay.
It's almost the same, I know, but I have a reason. They recently came out with that game, A Way Out. And the way how it looks is, while of course it's that objective, getting out, it does look like it kind of does tell the story of these two inmates. And it's bringing back more of a storytelling environment to the multiplayer world. As well as that game Unraveled 2 that they just announced. I mean, they're balls of yarn. I doubt there's going to be much talking in general, which means that unless it's just like a straight up level by level thing, they're going to have to use more cinematic elements in order to tell the story.
Well phrased. And this comes back to what I was talking about. I really do. I don't have anything against multiplayer games or the communities that play multiplayer games. So I don't want to come across like I'm berating them or that I blame them for the kind of drought of decent single player games lately. But it has to be said that the multiplayer market has kind of drowned a lot of things. There's a lot of opportunities for good single player experiences that have been rerouted into multiplayer markets. Fallout 76 is a good example of this because while I'm kind of looking forward to Fallout 76. I have to put aside my bias, which is the fact that they have converted a single player game into a multiplayer game for the purposes of creating a service that they can support and gouge people for money for an extended period of time. Destiny is another great example of this. I literally call it MMO Halo. So I've shit on multiplayer games. We've all taken our turn at it. I don't want to isolate that group of people too much. I don't want to call them out, but let's talk about some other games with some very large cinematic components, just kind of some specific examples, and we'll kick it to Jake first. Is there anything that kind of hits you up right here?
Yeah, so when I first even thought about the term cinematic gaming was actually kind of recently. The thought had never occurred to me. I was playing a very good game, you might have heard of it, called Kingdom Come Deliverance.
You have done nothing but complain about that game since you bought it.
Yes, I have, but it is a great game. But the problem I had in my first 2 or 3 hours of playing the game, I was watching more cutscenes than I was playing a game. It's at that point where it's too much. There's too much cinematic in a game. As opposed to another game I played recently, a little older game called Dying Light, where the cutscenes and the gameplay blend very smoothly to the point, but there's very few cutscenes. It's usually just you talking on the radio. You get to see the world falling apart around you, and you get to interact with it. And it's very cinematic, but you're playing the game rather than watching Henry do whatever the hell it is on his dad's blacksmith place. I don't even know.
And Drew, what about you? Is there anything that kind of stands out to you that immediately popped in your head when I brought up this topic? Well, don't answer me all at once there, Drew.
Drew?
Okay. Well, that answers the question, I guess.
I'm going to miss him.
Yeah, he will be missed. Anyway, we can continue. For me, I remember Metal Gear Solid as definitely like one of the big workhorses of cinema and cutscenes in gaming, sometimes even to a fault. I find that, you play a game like Metal Gear Solid 2, its climactic scene has like 35 minutes of consecutive cutscene, not counting codec calls. You better buckle down for an experience right there. Grab some popcorn, you're gonna need it. And the cutscenes are great. One of the things I always think makes for a very exciting cutscene is we got him back. Let's reconnect him. Reconnected.
Yeah, what was with that?
It happens. So did you hear my question, or do I need to repeat it?
I heard Jake talking about Kingdom Come Deliverance a little bit, and then it cut out.
Now I'm going to give you the question I gave him, which is there any game whose cinematic components, either cutscene or non-cutscenes, visual, audio combinations, really speak to you, that you really remember, you really stand out when I brought up this term?
Once again, I have to go with Detroit Become Human. And as I said, it doesn't quite fit in line as a cinematic game. It's more of a your choices lead to consequences, so on and so forth. However, the characters and how they are reacting to each other in the backgrounds, the graffiti on the wall, the advertisement that the game is setting up, the role that these other androids are playing really do help to pull you into the story of the game.
I have not played Detroit Become Human. I probably won't just because I've never been a huge fan of the collection of games that company has produced. But I definitely know where that comes from, or the idea of it. I think that another great example is The Last of Us. Uh, The Last of Us has a lot of, I guess, components to it that are very complex in a visual aspect and a visual style. For instance, you can tell a lot about like the zombie you're fighting based off of how it looks. They don't have this, reason or necessity to burn a lot of dialogue explaining it. And I like that. I like that they're willing to do that. I think another great game that doesn't use exposition as much as it definitely could is Final Fantasy 15. Final Fantasy 15 conveys a lot of its story and the relationship of its characters through very subtle things. Now, yes, do they joke around? Is there like talking and banter that occurs between them? Yes, it definitely does. And while they do give off the whole group of gay guys going on a road trip vibe, I think that's an offensive thing to say. Did I offend? Is that offensive?
Isn't that your goal?
I don't.
I'm
I never intend to be offensive. It's just sometimes I phrase things in ways that sometimes sound offensive.
I just like to describe them as a boy band.
Yeah, they give me that vibe too. But there's a lot of very nice subtleties and nuances that exist in how these characters interact. There's a scene with almost no talking. There's one line of dialogue that's spoken by Noctis. I'm about to spoil the ending, so Jake, mute me for a second so you don't hear this. Because I know you haven't finished the game yet. Have you done that? Oh wait, he won't be able to hear me anyways. So, there's a scene where Noctis is sitting on the throne of Lucy Castle, and the ghost of his father is standing next to the throne, and you can see his dad's expression as Noctis is, sacrificing himself to kill the antagonist once and for all. And he has just this really pained expression. Just this agonized look on his face. And you can see it. There's just subtleties in his face that every time Noctis takes a hit, you can see him wince. You can see him flinch a little bit. Like there's a lot of deep kind of expression that's being used here. And I think it's beautiful. I think it's fantastic. It's a greatly constructed scene for a game that is admittedly far better than the Final Fantasy fans will have you believe, but the Final Fantasy fans hate everything. So I don't really know what to say about that. Drew, would you please tell Jake he can unmute me now?
Jake, you can unmute him. I thought that game did have amazing ways of pulling you into the world of the game that didn't necessarily have to do with just exposition. Even the costumes you can get, the cup noodles costume, kind of point out that, this is a world that's not just on the brink of destruction. It's a place where people live, where people work. You go into a power plant at one point, and you are tasked with clearing out the fiends that are there. I can't remember their actual term in that game, but you are there because of the people who work there, not because, oh, we need to get from point A to point B. This person is asking for your help with their job. It really pulls you in and makes this universe feel a lot more real.
And even another way they did this is just, I think soundtrack really helped with that one too. Actually, we're going to talk about audio and soundtracks. Jake, I want to ask you a question. Is there any game soundtrack that you think really just powers home its experience as a game?
I'm going to say 2 games. The first of which is Undertale. which has an amazing soundtrack, and everyone should play it. But my favorite soundtrack was Final Fantasy X.
Ooh.
Because every moment of that game that had any music at all fit the environment you were sitting in perfectly. From the ruins of Narkand to Besaid Island, you felt like the music matched it perfectly, as if you were there in real life and listening to the natives play their little native music on their little native instruments on Besaid.
What's the song they play in Final Fantasy X and X-2 when they're playing like a somber or a sad moment? It has a name.
Return to Xanarkand?
No, I don't think that's it.
Two Xanarkand is one. Are you talking about the piano solo?
No, this one kind of has it sounds like I think a horn solo to be the na 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 na. That one.
I know the one you're talking about, but I'm going to go with I don't know the name.
All right. Well, you know what? Luckily for me, I have both Final Fantasy X and X-2's entire soundtrack on my computer, and I'm a master of finding it. I think. Don't quote me on this. Let's see if it is, in fact, the correct song.
Anyway, I'm going to extend that, though, to almost every Final Fantasy has an amazing soundtrack. You were saying 15. Very superb soundtrack, what little of it I have gotten to play. And I know fans of the series love to dump on Final Fantasy 13, but I would almost put its level of soundtrack to the same as the other Final Fantasies, because it still fits and it's still very well made music. It's a very good series of games. Whoever does their musical composition is a genius.
Uematsu, isn't it?
For the soundtrack, that depends on which game. I know that
I know he did 10. He did 10.
No, he did 10 too, I think.
No, you might be right, but I'm pretty sure he did 10.
No.
But
actually, no. Nobuo Iwamatsu is the guy who designs the characters. The guy who I think does most of the soundtrack work. No, Nobuo Uematsu does make a lot of it. But I know that Akira Kuroda made a lot of the more iconic songs from Final Fantasy X. Mainly the ones I'm thinking of are To Xanarkand. And that song that I was trying to find the name for. It's called A Dream That Will End Sometime.
Someday the Dream Will End, yes.
Yeah.
That's the name of it.
That's it.
As a kid, my dad would call them movie games, what we're talking about now. I think Final Fantasy X is the perfect example of you interacting with the world, but the story is being told almost like you're watching a movie. And I think Final Fantasy X did about the perfect balance. You don't have too many cutscenes. There's enough gameplay between them, but the cutscenes it does have are necessary and well done to the point where it's not annoying that you're not playing the game.
All right, first off, there is definitely parts of Final Fantasy X that are cutscene heavy. Let us not forget that Luca is still a part of that game.
No, it's fine.
No, we're gonna talk about Luca. If you're gonna bring up Final Fantasy X, we're gonna talk about Luca. You know what scene I'm talking about.
We're gonna just go with it. 10 is the best game ever made. Final Fantasy X is a perfect gaming experience.
100%. Listen, I'm not arguing with you. I like Final Fantasy X. It's one of my favorite Final Fantasy games, even if I secretly love Final Fantasy X-2 more. Oh, well, it's not a secret now. But
0 cred. You just lost all your cred.
You're the one who said that you liked Final Fantasy 13 earlier. So, and by the way,
but at least Lightning is a loved character.
I lost my credibility when I said that Final Fantasy 15 was a pretty great game, and that the Final Fantasy community will hate everything. So I think that if I'm gonna isolate myself from the Final Fantasy fan base, I think I've already succeeded.
I thought it was a good game, and I like Final Fantasy.
Fantastic.
I like.
Gosh, I got the sneezes today.
So I
But
actually have two games as well for this
okay, let's bring it up.
category. The first one I'm going to say I am going to catch some flack because it has very little to do with the story mode. This is a multiplayer game in every aspect.
I swear to God, if you say Call of Duty World at War, I will go to your house and hug you.
Halo Reach.
Retching noises.
Hold on.
Okay, I know what you're talking about because I've also played Halo Reach and I know the story of the game.
I'll be
Uh,
honest with you. It's probably the best Halo game.
As far as spoilers go, I don't really care because it's like an 8-year-old game at this point. So if you
Everybody
haven't played
dies.
it, yeah, everyone dies. And the audio that's going on in the background is that sad, somber music that Halo could pull off back then. Now I think everyone would wonder what was happening to their game. But the environments have their own soundtrack that do feel really good with the game. And so, okay, I'll catch flack from you too for that one. But my second one is actually Life is Strange.
Yeah, no, I'm just gonna let that awkward silence hang for a few seconds. I don't know why. So we're talking a lot about Square Enix titles here. I think it's clear to see that Square Enix does a reasonably good job of creating soundtrack, visual
I
components that
actually
are
always
pretty well
forget
constructed.
that one is Square Enix.
Yeah, most people do
The
because
song you're thinking about from Reach, by the way, is "We Remember."
Okay.
Huh.
Fitting title.
Yep.
But for Life is Strange, the fact that it's happening in like Washington where all the hipsters live, so that's the kind of music that's playing on the radios. Um, that's the kind of music they use in the background, so it gets you to, as far as the location goes, that's who these people tend to be. Um, but it's also the younger crowd. So when you go to the party, it's more of the techno-y kind of stuff. When you're just kind of out and about, it's got more of the music that kind of exemplifies nature that you're in, or the city that you're in. Town, it's kind of small. Um, and then when something big happens, that music is there and it's kind of big, but at the same time it's somber because that's the point that the game tends to try and push towards. It doesn't use "and the characters were sad" as a way of explaining the emotions that you're supposed to be feeling. It's using the soundtrack of the game to really push that.
we're going to talk about a game that I think uses its cinematography to an incredible extent. It's probably, and this is going to sound strange because we're talking about a lot of sad games with a lot of heavy emotions, and that's fine, but I want to talk about one that uses it for something funnier. Have either of you two played Devil May Cry 4?
Oh my
yeah.
god, I love that game.
So then you probably know what scene I'm about to reference. Do you know the scene where he gets Lucifer? The backpack that throws swords? So, this is a great way that you can use cinematography in combination with your expectations to create a scene that is absolutely nothing like what you'd expect. So I will describe the scene in gross detail without using the verbiage, A, because I don't know the entire monologue by heart, but B, because it's nothing but an entire sex innuendo for passionate sex making. He throws these swords into this monolith, and they use shots where you can see where they're landing, but you can't see what he's making with them. So he's just throwing swords at it. You get these scenes, a lot of flourishes, a lot of action, a lot of cuts are being made. It's really fast paced, and he's just kind of like, I'm told that the voice actor improv this entire line to be nothing but one giant sex joke. And then the scene ends with a wide shot where he lands on the ground, claps his hand, and says, "And then we are both satisfied." And he throws this rose, which came out of nowhere, at the at the monolith, and then you get to see he drew a fucking heart on it with an arrow through the middle. And the swords explode. You see the heart shape get cut out, and then the middle sword pops and it breaks in half. That was great. That was probably one of the best scenes in that entire game, and that's a game laden with some pretty great scenes because Devil May Cry, despite it being known for its great gameplay, does actually have a pretty good grasp of how to make a good action shot. All the openings of these games have great cinematography. Like every single one of them.
I think that pretty much any Capcom game, as far as their storytelling ones go, do have great cinematography. Look at the Resident Evil series.
Those are hit and miss,
Doesn't matter.
Like when it comes to how they control things, I would say that Resident Evil 5 and I think even 4 to some extent is it's shot like a very stereotypical action movie, and that's not a bad thing. I can't fault them for that because that's how those games feel.
5 and 6 kind of follow that trend. But I would say and I'm also not counting Outbreak 1 and 2 because no one remembers those, so
Also,
they don't
those
exist.
didn't really have cutscenes.
Right. But I'm not even talking about the cutscenes. I'm talking even as far as how the game was played. They specifically, in the first ones, forced it to be at a specific camera angle, so you didn't necessarily know what was around the corner. We know, as we all know, in a lot of these over-the-shoulder games or where the camera is behind the player or whatever, typically just because of how the camera moves, you end up seeing a lot more of the map than you really should, and so that takes away a lot of the mystery of the game, the horror.
I think the fixed camera angle even works better in the case of Resident Evil than say I think it did in like Silent Hill. The thing about both of these games, and the reason why I think Silent Hill made the transition to over the shoulder a little bit better than Resident Evil did sometimes, is that the fixed cameras and things combined with the sound direction. So, a great example in Resident Evil 1 is that you'll hear the zombie. You'll hear that, like, ooh sound. But because of how the camera works, you don't know where it is. And there's always that little bit of anxiety for people who don't know, haven't, memorized the layout of the entire game, like many Resident Evil fans have, that's kind of a terrifying thing sometimes. To know that there's something in a room and not know where it is or like what to do about it. And that can be terrifying, and it becomes more terrifying as the enemies get more silent. Hunters don't make as much sound as zombies do. And when hunters start to get in there, suddenly it changes the whole aspect of the game. It becomes very scary in that way. So, I get what you're talking about there, because the fixed camera angles of Resident Evil were actually quite terrifying for how they did it. But I think Silent Hill 3 is another really good example, though, of a game that made that transition to like over-the-shoulder camera. But I think did it quite well. So, on its basic premise...
And once again...
Yeah, wait, you can go.
And once again, it used more of just the cinematography to get you to feel the emotions that are supposed to be felt in the game with very little dialogue. There is not much dialogue in the entire game.
Resident Evil or Silent Hill?
Silent Hill.
That's true. That's mostly because there's not a lot of people in Silent Hill. When a character talks, half the time it's to themselves. Actually, one of the things I want to applaud Resident Evil for was that a lot of their actual pre-rendered cutscenes were shot with like really tight angles to really give a claustrophobic feeling for the mansion. I thought that was really well done, something subtle that you can kind of miss. But as far as Silent Hill is concerned, it uses the same philosophy of sounds plus no visual representation to create suspense and horror. And I think that, especially in the context of horror games, sound is much scarier than visuals. There's a lot of scenes in Silent Hill 3 where your vision is the range of your flashlight. You know, you don't hear anything else. Or you don't see anything else. So you have to rely on your hearing to like pick up the rest of it. And sometimes that's fucking terrifying. Because you either A, don't know what you hear, or B, do know what you hear and really don't like the idea of what's waiting for you. Seriously, if you play Silent Hill 3, you will get to know every single enemy in that game by the sound it makes. You'll know a nurse from a dog, from a slurper is what we call them, mostly because they sound like they're slurping something. Also, they kind of look like rapists, which I think they're supposed to. But yeah, it's terrifying. That's a great way that you can combine visual aspects and audio aspects of a game to succeed in your expected delivery. What's a great aspect of visual storytelling that I really enjoyed? DMC. I know people hate Devil May Cry's reboot, remake, whatever you want to call it. And that's fine. I don't think it's a particularly great game, but I also think that you're high if you don't think that opening scene in that game isn't hilarious as shit. That scene where he's like jumping through his trailer, putting on his clothes, and his like all of the censorship they're using makes it look like a penis anyways. That's great. That's hilarious. Actually, I think visual style is a good thing to talk about. When I talk about visual style is how you can take parts to make something look like something that it's not. And I'll start an example of this. I saw this recently in Dragon Ball FighterZ. Now, it's a fighting game, so it's probably not the richest in storytelling, but I can't help but want to talk about its visual style real fast, which is that it emulates the 90s television show. It's a 3D model, but the way it's animated appears like a 90s two-dimensional animated cartoon, which is pretty cool. Is there any games like that for you, Drew, that you see the visual style of one thing emulated in something else?
Come back to me. I think I know of one. I just am trying to remember exactly which.
Well, all right. I have more things to talk about. And I think that old Jake is back.
Hello.
All right, he's back. For those of you who didn't know, he dipped out for a second because he was getting audio issues. But, Jake, have you played Bayonetta?
I actually haven't played Bayonetta.
It's a great game.
So I've been told.
It's
most
got
of my
boobies in
reasoning for not most of my reasoning for not play it is, well, mostly the not really being into PlayStation.
It's on Steam.
At the moment. I know it's on Steam. Quit putting me on the spot. I don't...
Call out all of your mistakes and failures right here and now.
Hey,
No,
you're
no,
not
I'm
my
not
father.
You're right. If I was your dad, have a job by now.
I have a job.
Damn you.
Fuck you.
uh, where was I? What the fuck was I talking about before I began insulting my guests?
Visual styles.
Yes, visual styles. Have you ever seen a game where the visual style of one thing has been emulated in something else?
Yes. Hyperdimension Neptunia looks like anime. And I have to say, I love every second of it.
You love every second of it because you are a masterful
Don't say
pervert.
it. Don't, you said it. Anyway. For those of you who
I'm the
don't
one
know,
who introduced you to Hyperdimension Neptunia. I am the worst person in the room.
as the guy who could play his game one-handed. Yeah, I know. I was there. But I think if we're gonna go with visual art styles that remind you of another thing, we have to kind of exclude anything that is based on those other things. For instance, I can't tell you I like the art style of Deadpool because it looks like Deadpool. You know? Because that's obvious. So, one game we haven't talked about yet, Nier Automata has.
I was trying
a
to
very
avoid bringing
excellent-
up another Square Enix game, but continue.
Stop.
I was
Square
about
Enix,
to bring up
best
another one.
company. Anyway, so the visual style is similar to Final Fantasy 15. But darker, more post-apocalyptic-y, more dystopian. Lots of ruins as opposed to cities. Very well executed in what is actually kind of a small map, all told. Feels much bigger just because the environment itself fits, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
And also has a great soundtrack. You know, we were talking about that. But I think the thing about Nier Automata that everyone can agree on is the main character, 2B, is the hottest female in video games. I'm throwing it down. I've made the call.
All right, now that everyone watching this has silently judged you, I will now agree with you wholeheartedly. Visual style works great here. I have always wondered about this one because it's super clear to me that the developers of Nier Automata put a lot of time and effort into making 2B unnecessarily attractive. And it makes me wonder, why would you design an entire series of androids that look super hot? Like, they're battle robots. They're designed to kill things. Why is 2B very fuckable?
Well, do you remember the surprise twist at the end, correct?
Yeah, that 9S wanted to fuck 2B in the least surprising twist that you could
That was the
possibly
least
create.
surprising twist. No, the actual twist at the actual end of the game. Where
Yes.
it's revealed that the rope... Chezwik, I'm going to spoil it. Have you finished it?
Not fully, but that's fine.
Okay. So at the end, it's revealed that the robots, that the androids you've been playing as, destroy, basically for shits and giggles at this point, created the androids. And I think the reason the androids are all super hot is because they got most of their information on humans from media, where everybody's super hot.
Ah, yes, the future where there's only attractive people. Me and you, Jake,
Yes.
will not exist in the future.
Well, fun fact, everybody's dead in Nier Automata anyway. So,
Yes.
you know, there's that.
Here's a great example of a game that I feel like has too much cinematic components to it, like more than I think it needed. I have seen Sonic Adventure 2 and probably played that game I'm not really sure. I've played Sonic Adventure 2 Battle for so many hours that it's internalized. I could play both of you two right now in that game, and you wouldn't come close to beating me. Would not
That's
even be
okay.
competitive.
You could say the same thing with 06, though.
No, not really. Okay, yes, I could actually. But to be fair, in the complete spirit of fairness, Sonic 06 was a problem with writing. Its cinematic components weren't horribly terrible. Like they were designed well. The set pieces were interesting enough. The problem, it wasn't in the pieces themselves, but how they put the story together, such as Sonic and Redhead in desert, now they are in field, and now they are in city. What?
I was more meaning that you are a Sonic maniac.
No. I've only beaten Sonic Mania once. I've beaten Sonic Forces 40 times. Yes, I'm a Sonic maniac. Sue me. Actually, here's a great example, I think, of cinematics that I think was a great combination of great Easter egg, great reference, and absolutely beautiful scene to accompany it. At the end of Resident Evil Revelations 2, and for those of you who have not played it, I am under the opinion that Resident Evil Revelations 2 is the best Resident Evil game that they've ever made. You play as Barry during the final boss fight. And Barry went to this island to try to rescue his daughter. And his daughter says to him in this cutscene, "Do you need my help, Dad?" And he says, "I'll always need you, sweetheart. But for right now, I have this." And he pulls out his Magnum. And the scene accompanying this, where he slow-mo pulls out his Magnum and you get to see like all of the details of it, combined with the legendary line of Barry, me and my brother played through that scene and we couldn't stop laughing. This was a thing of absolute beauty in its finest form. For context, and the reason why this scene is so well put together, that is a reference. It is a reference to Resident Evil 1 and not the remake, the original 90s cut of the game, where Barry says to Jill after giving her the grenade rounds on the second floor, Jill says, "What about you, Barry?" He goes, "Oh, don't worry. I have this." And it's become one of the most iconically cheesy lines in that thing, right up there with Jill Sandwich. Which, by the way, they also make a reference to in Revelations 2. You also get a Jill Sandwich reference. It's fantastic. But just seeing Barry say, "I have this," accompanied by a slow-mo shot of him pulling out his Magnum, it's beauty. It's just like, how can I not love every second of this shot? It's quite literally one of the greatest scenes in gaming. But I think that it's important to think about the aspects of visual content in games, because it is such a different medium than a movie is. Because you can consume a movie; it's a one-way experience. But a game is not always a one-way experience. You have to provide input into video games. And the visual components and the soundtracks and all these things put together, if you put them in a movie, it might have a different connotation than if you put them in a game, because the game, you've done things to make it to this point. A sad moment in a game might be sadder than a sad moment in a movie because you've been there experiencing it up to this point. And I don't know, I'll kick this one to Drew first. How do you feel in a video game when you hit these big emotional cinematic parts? Is there kind of a more solid connection because you've been a part of it than, say, in a movie? Or am I just fucking high?
Absolutely. Well, part of the thing is, at least for me, is that video game company that you're not a huge fan of what they've done, the one that's released games like Heavy Rain and Detroit Become Human.
Okay, I'm not saying they're bad. I just don't like them.
Right. The choices you make are those points in the game. Those ones where you feel tons of emotion, not just at the outcome, but over the sweating bullets to make sure that you choose exactly what you feel needs to be chosen for what you do. It is the choose your adventure books from first, second grade that we all remember, but to the next level. Games are able to build that character more than just a 2D representation of themselves through words, but instead their mannerisms, their actions, the way they say something, not just how they say it, really do. All right. Anyways, it brings a new dimension to the character. They aren't just the 2D of a character in a book or in a movie, but you're actually seeing and being them while they are making these emotions, while they are saying the things they do in the way that they do. Even first person books can't do that to that degree. They don't have the audio to accompany everything. They don't have, maybe a character is a little bit more of a pain in the butt, so everything they do is a little bit more snarkily done. Instead, it's just every once in a while the author can put that in. And so it doesn't mean as much. It doesn't build up that repetition with a character. Or in a movie, a movie tends to be limited to an hour and a half long of that character.
Chezwik? Oh, did he disconnect? Did we lose him, Jake?
I appear to have lost him as well.
Huh. Technical difficulties abound this evening, it would seem. This is going to be a fun one to edit. But I guess I'll continue on with his sentiment or his idea, because I do kind of agree with it, and I do think that the unique take that a video game can have is unique. That there is something to be said about living in the shoes of a character. That you can't really understand somebody until you've walked a mile in their shoes. There's some truth to that. You'll understand a character more having been that character, because you understand the subtle nuances of what they're capable of. And I want to kick that point to you then, Jake. How do you feel about that when you play a video game? Walking in the shoes of another. Do you really insert yourself into their character, or do you, disconnect? Is it something else going on?
Well, I play a lot of The Sims. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I do very much feel like I'm getting in the shoes of, as the figure of speech goes, these individuals. I'm not just controlling them, I'm coming them, more so than just I created this character in games like Elder Scrolls. No, even in games where I don't get to pick the character, I have no say in it. And part of that is just, empathizing with them, because you are sort of experiencing what they're experiencing. You're the one playing the game. But there's more to it than that, because environment is so important to getting yourself into a story, whether it's a movie or a book or a game. It has to appeal to you. So, yeah, I would say yes. In a very long-winded way, I would say yes.
Chezwik, are you back?
Yeah.
He is reconnected. I kind of continued your thought after you cut out there. But I kind of brought it back to the point here, and I'll kick this question to you as well. Is there that personal connection that happens in a game because you can walk a mile in another person's shoes, quite literally in this case. You know, you get to understand characters better, not just as a character, but you get to know their capabilities, what they can do, what they can't do. You start to know them much better than you could know a character from a movie. Do you feel that way, or is it when you play a game it's very disconnected?
For the most part, I have to say yes, you do feel a lot closer to that character, as when you're playing them, you really do feel like, because you have to, you feel like you are the one who is doing these things. You are the one who's pushing that statue to move it into place. You're the one who's doing all of this, because even though it's only on a joystick or however you may be playing, you are actually doing an action and getting a response back for doing that action. There's very few games that I would say don't actually follow that, which is kind of a detriment. The main one actually being Pokemon. The original games, you always hear in those games, oh, you take care of your Pokemon so well, they love you, blah blah blah. It's like, no, I treat them like they are toys and they're going to help me rule the world. I don't know what you're talking about. And honestly,
Oh yeah, I'll let you finish.
Okay, honestly, that kind of subtracts from the story of the game. So any good game, well, those are still good games, but they're mechanically good. Any good game really does have uh, the forced empathy that you get by feeling you are that player.
I think there's a really great example of this. Probably the most crystal clear example for me is it's the ending of Metal Gear Solid 3. There's a scene in which a character who's very important to the main character who you've been playing as the entire time asks you to kill her. And this it's a cutscene, and then it transitions to the scene where you see Snake with the gun and he's about to shoot her, but he doesn't until you push the fire button. You have to pull the trigger on this scene. It's so much different with that little insertion of that mechanic, because watching Snake kill her would be tragic. That would be sad. Pulling the trigger yourself, knowing it, internalizes that feeling. Like, it doesn't just feel bad anymore from witnessing something sad happening. Now you feel like you're a part of it. Like, you are now an element in this tragedy. And it hits way harder than I think it has any right to sometimes. But it's very tragic. It's a very tragic scene, and the fact they make you pull the trigger on that person is way more intense than if you just saw it happen. It's just a simple thing. It's just literally push one button.
The only complaint I have about that is the game literally does force you to press the button to shoot. There is not a second option, if my memory serves.
Well, yeah, because it's representative of the character you're playing as. You don't get the Snake doesn't have a choice in this matter.
Right.
Because he, from his perspective, with all the information available at that moment, knows that this is what he has to do. Now, does the context change?
Yeah. Point of separation. Actually, I think a better comparison might actually be from a Call of Duty game. In the No Russian.
I was thinking about the one where they make you fire on that group of people in the airport.
That's No Russian.
Oh.
Where from the beginning of the game, you could have said, no, I do not want to play this level. you wouldn't lose anything because you didn't know that this level existed. Instead, you more than likely said, yeah, I'll play it. And then you're put into this situation where you are a mole and you have to open fire on this airport. And you're the one who does it. You can walk around and not shoot anyone, and your conscience might feel a little bit cleaner, but more than likely, especially that first playthrough where you don't know if there is, if you don't reach a certain threshold, whatever, you'll be found out, blah, blah, blah. But you are knowingly pulling the trigger, killing these innocents, and you honestly feel dirty at the end of that level. That's probably one of the best design levels in a shooter in a long time as far as storytelling goes.
I agree with you, but I think that I maybe did a disservice with that scene at the end because there's a lot of context that goes with it that is obviously left out. It doesn't make you feel bad immediately because in many ways you feel mission accomplished, this is what I came to do. It's a heartbreaking scene, but it was kind of what had to be done. When the context comes out, when you're given the full debriefing afterwards, that's when the dynamic of what you did changes. Like, it forces you into this spot, makes you feel good about it at that moment, but then drops the bombshell on you, recontextualizes everything, and then you're just, I'm a horrible person. I'm a horrible person, and I had no idea I was a horrible person because I was manipulated by people into being a horrible person. And I think that has a lot of impact because that is, at its core, you as a human being. Like, now you can separate yourself from the game character because now you can say, I was fooled. I, as a human being, was fooled into being a horrible person. Like, it wasn't just the character anymore. Now, because you and the character have really hit this point of being ciphers of one another, there's something more to it. Now the game has influenced you as a person. It's affected you as a person. And I think that's a powerful message to say. And I think the Call of Duty also does that in that scene, where it really does build this cipher between you and the faceless person that you're playing as. And when you pull that trigger, it feels less like the person and more like you did it. That you were put in that spot. It is. I think it's a great deconstruction of human behavior done through cinematography and cinematics in video games. I have one more point that I want to get to. And that is Skyrim. Because I can't have a game podcast that goes by without us talking about Skyrim. I want to talk about Skyrim in this case. Because it's an interesting game. It is a role-playing game, almost, I think, in the most literal context of a role-playing game. It is not heavily gameplay-focused. It's got very simple mechanics. But it's not cinematic in the same way that, say, a game like Metal Gear Solid or Call of Duty even sometimes can be. It's not composed of all these epic cutscenes, but a lot of very just visual lore things happening around you. An environment that is very alive. Is that cinematic gameplay? Is that a game that's using cinematics to augment the experience, or is this something, different? And I guess I'll kick that question to Jake first.
Skyrim is not a cinematic game the way I would think about one. First of all, it's very open as to what you can do in Skyrim. I've had 17 plus hours of mindlessly running around killing mud crabs. I know everyone has done stupid shit like that for lots of more time than they're usually willing to admit in Skyrim, but the story kind of exists in Skyrim for you to play with rather than to be told. It is entirely up to you what you want your gaming experience to be. but the story is still kind of mandatory for the genre and way the game is built, that it has to be there. They can't just throw you into an empty world of Skyrim and expect you to have fun with no characters and no story. So they throw all that around, and then you get to be Dovahkiin or the Grand Wizard of the college. I never do the college. I don't know what it's called. You get to be the Archmage of the college and do all that shit. And every little story kind of plays out the same way. Sometimes your choices matter. Most of the time, it's a little irrelevant. But it's not, the story's not there to be told. The story's there for you to play with, I guess, is the big point I'm trying to.
So you're saying that Skyrim is less of a gameplay thing, more of a thing you play, and more of an experience that you have that you kind of craft.
Yes.
Drew, what about you? Do you think that what Skyrim is closer to cinematic gameplay, or is it, something different?
I am going to say it's not cinematic. And that's only because of my definition of cinematic. And that is, if you basically took this game and kind of stripped it down a little bit, took out a little bit more of the just moving from point A to point B and wandering around and that sort of thing, and you just clipped all of this together, could you watch this and it basically be a movie? Doesn't need that narration constantly, because most movies typically don't have that narration. You just kind of know what's going on with the little bit of backstory in the first place. And then you kind of know what the character is going to go and do. While Skyrim is, like Jake said, spend 15 hours killing mud crab for their chitin, and then go ahead and take over every single guild in this state.
It's a province.
And then state, province.
Actually, yeah, those are nearly interchangeable.
But anyways, it does not flow as a movie would. While God of War, if you were to take out, every single little encounter and just kept more of the larger ones, that could be a movie that you could sit down and watch.
So then, let me ask a question about this then. So earlier we talked about Dark Souls and how its visual aspects can help tell stories very well, even though it too is not a very heavy cutscene driven game. Oftentimes cutscenes in that game are small 8 to 10 second things that exist to show up a badass set piece for a boss. Why is it that we would call what Dark Souls does visual storytelling, with the way it sets up and designs its gameplay that we are interacting with, but then Skyrim is not? And I'll ask this question to you, Drew, since you were answering the previous one.
I would say that with Dark Souls, you're almost going in a linear direction. You could go and do things out of order, but in the end, you're still working towards the same direction. While in Skyrim, if it was a movie, it would be the first third of a movie, and then 15 mini episodes, and then the rest of the movie. Maybe.
Jake, what about you? I'll pose the same question to you. Why would we consider what Dark Souls does visual storytelling, and Skyrim, is not, at least according to what you two have said?
The short answer, and I don't want to offend anybody here, but I'm going to. Skyrim is not beautiful. It never was, and it never is. You're lying to yourself if you think Skyrim without mods is beautiful. And Dark Souls is. So they can use that environment to tell a story in a way that Bethesda doesn't. But it's also, for all the greatness that is Dark Souls, you can beat Dark Souls in 3 hours.
It's true.
You can.
Yeah, it's true.
I can't play Skyrim, do every side quest, the main story, every guild, in anything less than maybe 30 hours. Probably more. So
I agree with both of you, too, regarding me not putting Skyrim in the same category as I would put Dark Souls. And that is different than for what you two have said, though. I don't call Skyrim a cinematic experience because whereas Dark Souls, every visual element is being utilized to, allow you to develop a narrative in your head. Skyrim's narrative, the one that exists in your head as you play it, is very difficult to put together with just the set pieces. In fact, Jake, this, is that when I, build a character in Skyrim, there's a large elements of roleplay to it. I've only really had one or two of those that I could successfully put together a very cinematic storytelling and gameplay experience with, but it felt like it was ham-fisted by me. And that's the difference to me. Sure, I made the Forsworn Slayer in Skyrim. It's a great character, lots of depth, a lot of fun to play, does a lot of cool cinematic things. But that is a story that I have ham-fisted into Skyrim. When I play Dark Souls, there is a story that exists. It's there. You can tell there's clearly the pieces that exist to make this story happen. How you put them together in combination with the expositionary components from like item descriptions as well as, just the visual aspects of the maps and things, that develops the story in your head with the pieces that already exist. It's one of those, ask 10 people what their definition of love is. You get 10 different answers. Well, ask people what the 3 angels on top of the Grand Archives are doing, you might get 10 different answers. That's more of what I see in it when I compare and contrast the two. Now, I had one more point, but I'm at an hour and a half and have to cut this. So we're going to give everybody their shameless plug time, as is part of the agreement for selling your soul to the devil. We'll start with you, Jake.
Well, as I'm sure everyone's sick of hearing by now, I am the man, the myth, the legend, Jake Midas Barger, also known as Midas the Fuzzy at twitch.tv, but I'm mostly a YouTuber with my good buddy, the Great Ninja Man, GreenOrkzGaming. It'll be in the description. Click on it. Go watch my videos. Do it. But that's my thing. I'm sticking to it. Please go watch my videos. Please.
Perfect. Drew, what about you? Do you have anything to shamelessly plug to our audience?
I am Drew Chezwik Smith, the meme, the legend, because I'm not a myth. And anymore, I'm mostly on Twitch doing streams right now. Actually, a Pokemon randomized Nuzlocke stream at Lil Bear, Lil Bear 74 twitch.tv. So join me for that if you want to.
Perfect. And I am your host, Elijah Stubbs Roche. It has been a wonderful time talking with all of you. If you enjoy my Mickey Mouse bullshit, follow me on Twitter. Link for that will be in the description below. If you don't want to follow me on Twitter, well, fuck you then. But with that, I will have to bid everyone farewell. I hope you'll come back next week where the topic will be, I don't know what they are yet because I haven't planned out my next 4 topics. But we'll get there. Anyways, have a good evening. Have a great rest of your day. Have a wonderful life. And if you died as I was saying that, well, I'm sorry that the last thing you heard was my voice. See you next week.